First up for us is going to be Dr. Daniel Acuña, who's an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Colorado at Boulder, which is one of the CCTSI's key partners. So one of the things we do in the Flash Talks is try to demonstrate and illustrate the work that's going on within the CCTSI and its partners. Dr. Acuña leads the Science of Science and Computational Discovery Lab and works in that area. His current research harnesses data sets and applies machine learning and AI to uncover rules that make publication, collaboration, and funding decisions more successful. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the invitation, Matt. It's great to be here. It's the first time that I'm in this on this campus. Today I will present, I guess, a little bit about me. So I've been interested in computational methods for research integrity. So I've been funded, and I failed to put the funders' information here. I've been funded a couple of times by the U.S. Office of Research Integrity. We did a conference a couple of years ago, CRI-Conf. So if you go to cri-conf.org, it's a conference on computational research integrity. And the idea was to bring computer scientists, research integrity officers, journalists, and funders together to think about better ways of assessing, predicting automatically or semi-automatically research integrity issues in science. So the work that I will present today was done by mostly two students. Han Zhuang, he's in Northeastern University, and Lijian Liang, he's at Syracuse University. So I'll talk about questionable journals and methods to perhaps help the research community to detect them. So if you don't know about what that means and what questionable journals are, I'll have a slide about that. But there are shortcomings about how we do this today. So it's very slow, very time consuming, and it's mostly based on volunteering efforts to do this tracking. So I'll talk about a machine learning. So try to do the detection with AI to try to complement this human evaluation. And we'll evaluate this model. It's not perfect, of course, but then we'll try to interpret what it found. And I think it's helpful for us to think about complementary signals that we can use to detect these kinds of journals. Slide, please. Okay, so this is it was a Nature commentary a couple of years ago. It was about predatory journals, but we've been trying to be careful about not to call these journals predatory, but we try to call them questionable. So because we don't really know, we're just trying to say, okay, there is some risk that these journals might be doing something suspicious, so maybe we need human assessment of this. But the gist of this commentary was that we have this problem where open access basically has been taken advantage of by unscrupulous actors that are charging authors an author processing fee, and they promise them to publish their work. So scientists are getting published, but the review process is really non-existent, and they're getting charged. So there is a big list of journals that are doing this, but we don't. But there is a much bigger list of journals that are open access, but we don't know about. So the way that we've been trying to track these journals is with companies. So there is a company called Cabels that keep track of predatory whitelisted journals and predatory journals, and there is an open access, a volunteer based organization called the Directory of Open Access Journals, and they vet journals. So journals submit an application to them, and they review them. But in general, it's kind of difficult to gather this information because it takes a lot of effort to go through the website, read the papers, and assess many different signals that they have to do that. So next slide, please. So it's very slow. It takes time, and it's just hard work. So what we try to do. So I'm sorry, but next slide. I think I already said this. This is like a manual process. So this is an example of a predatory journal. So this is it's unfortunately a little small, but it's the International Journal of Agriculture, Science, and Research. But what I'm trying to show you here is first that the website looks like it's a template. So this particular publisher publishes hundreds of journals, and they all look the same. The editors of these journals are not from very well-known institutions. And more importantly, they charge you just to have your paper reviewed. So you have to pay $500, even if it doesn't get accepted. But the review process is basically non-existent. You get a paper accepted within a couple of days. Okay, so next slide, please. So our idea is to use the Directory of Open Access Journals, look at journals that are whitelisted, so we're submitted to them, they review them, and they apply a list of guidelines to them. And I'm listing basically the website needs to have all the information. There should be a clear peer review process. There should be a clear governing body or policies for publication. Some of these journals, after they are whitelisted and included to the Directory of Open Access Journals, they get removed. And we call those unwhitelisted journals. So what we try to do, we try to develop machine learning techniques to go to the website automatically, assess who is publishing those journals, and see if we can tell apart whitelisted journals from unwhitelisted journals. So next slide, please. So we have basically 3 kinds of signals that we're using. It's working. Okay, great. Perfect. So we have 3 kinds of signals. Again, how the website looks, and whether the website is using some sort of template. And we also have signals about the people that are publishing in that journal and the institutions that are publishing. And we try to get all of that together into a big model. We have around 15,000 journals that we analyze. Most of them are whitelisted, but we have a small fraction of them that are unwhitelisted, and we want to predict. So just to show you that the models are not perfect, we have different sets of models. So if you just use the website content, it's not that great. But if you use a combination of all the signals, how it looks, how the authors are publishing, where they're coming from, how they cite, all kinds of patterns, we get a pretty good accuracy in our prediction. Well, what's interesting is that we found that if we just look at the citation behavior, who is publishing in these journals, we are able to tell pretty decently whether this journal might be questionable. So we validated this with human reviewers. So we look at the signal. So basically we took the Directory of Open Access Journal guidelines, and we created features. So we kind of operationalize what these things mean. So when they talk about that the website should have information, we went to the website automatically, and we look on the website if they had like explanation about how the peer review process works. And that's a signal that our algorithm is using, and so on and so forth. So we found a pretty good agreement between what the algorithm predicts, what the model predicts, and these 3 human reviewers. One of the reviewers was actually a librarian, an expert librarian on open access journals, and she was amazing, and she gave us lots of really interesting in-depth information about this. So now one thing that I want to mention is that these predictions and this agreement calculation was done on journals that were not part of the Directory of Open Access Journals. So these are new predictions that have never been done before. So we are basically discovering new potentially problematic journals from just the data. Okay, so the method is not perfect, but then we took that and we look at the journals that we predict to have the highest likelihood of being predatory. Unfortunately, the slide is the colors are not that great. But basically, we're looking at, okay, let's take this model, let's predict journals that might be questionable, and let's see what we found. So we found that the citations to these journals have been increasing. So that's the bottom plot. But we find that the publications in these journals has not increased a lot. It increased in 2008 until 2012, but then it has stayed relatively stable since then. We don't yet know why, but we think it's because we have so much awareness about this issue that these journals are constantly changing and being shut down by the communities. We compare what we predict in terms of the countries that are represented. with the data that we already know, and we found a pretty good agreement. Unfortunately, countries in the global south are usually where the authors that publish in these journals are coming from. The top country that have authors publishing in questionable journals is Iran and India. Surprisingly for us, we found that some of these publications in questionable journals are acknowledging funders in the US. And we didn't control for the proportion of funding, but we found that the National Institute of Health is actually widely acknowledged in these journals. And we're still trying to understand why that's happening. We haven't done like any more in-depth analysis of these results. NSF is also acknowledged in these publications, and DOD as well. But again, this is expected because the National Institute of Health is the biggest funder in the world, so it's going to appear more often in these kinds of journals. Okay, so it looks like our predictions are kind of in line with what we would expect. Now, one thing that we wanted to help with was to try to understand if there are signals that perhaps the Directive of Open Access Journals is not using. So what we did, we took our model, the best model, and we look at signals that are coming from the bibliometrics. So we look at the journal bibliometrics, the authors that are publishing in those journals that are questionable, and the institutional bibliometrics. And basically what we found, these graphs represent how important each of these features are, and the color represents whether they're predictive of questionable behavior or not. So blue is predictive, so the higher this bar is, and the bluer it is more predictive. And what we found from journal bibliometrics is that journals that tend to be younger and that publish lots are generally more likely to be questionable. And this makes sense because questionable journals in general just publish lots of stuff. They just publish tens of thousands of papers per year, and they are young because once they are caught, they shut down and they start a new one. It's very easy to just create a new website. The authors that publish in these journals tend to have low H index, so low, they're relatively younger, and they tend to publish with many, many authors. So the author lists tend to be bigger as well. Now, if we look at the content of these publications, we found that, well, first, in terms of the journal itself, the affiliations that are part of these journals then tend to be lower in the ranks. So here, blue means it's bigger because in the rank here's the opposite. So the top university usually is like Harvard University, let's say. So that was going to be rank 1, but a university that is usually in the global south, they tend to be top 500, top 400. So the higher the ranking means that you're going to be a university that is not as well known, and that's unfortunately predictive of people of authors publishing in these types of journals. We also found that editorial boards tend to be really, really long in these journals. And that's something that we didn't find as a guidance in the Directive of Open Access Journals. And we found that they tend to lack conflict of interest policies, peer review policies, and copyright policies. So those are the red lines that you see. Okay, so we hope that this kind of tool can help organizations such as the Directive of Open Access Journals. We uncover around 1,500 journals that are in no index. So these are not part of the Directive of Open Access Journals, and we believe they're highly likely to be questionable journals. We found that, again, bibliometrics help a lot, so we don't necessarily need to go and look at the website with computer vision algorithms. So how the website looks is not so important as how the authors in those journals behave or cite each other. And but things that, of course, we would like more help with is to have more human reviews. So at the moment, we don't want to replace the human component of this. And so we would like to combine this, and we hope to collaborate with the OAJ on this effort. So for future work, I think we would like to also incorporate other signals. So questionable journals tend to, they're adversarial. So they're trying to deceive us, and they usually create fake journal names that look very similar to real journals. So they have The funnier one, I think, is Proceeding of the National Academy of Science. So they try to add some words that look very similar to PNAS, but in reality, they're not the same. And we want to help journals that are in the Global South. So a lot of these journals, unfortunately, are more common in the Global South, but there are legitimate journals that are trying to publish in that area of the globe, and we want to incorporate their knowledge about what makes a journal legitimate in their side of the world. So, and with that, I'll thank you, and I think I have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, great. Excellent presentation. We do have a couple minutes for questions. One in the back here. There are a few questions. Go for it.
I remember a few years ago, there was I forget who it was, but he maintained a list of these journals and he ended up having to take it down because of legal threats. So has the landscape on that changed at all? Like, what can you do with these data now to try and protect the naive?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the Beals list, and I think he was from Colorado, which is pretty awesome. And I think he, got shut down pretty badly. I think the university didn't even support him, so it's pretty sad. And he was a librarian, and I love librarians. They are pretty careful people in general. So we're trying to be careful ourselves, so we're not calling them predatory journals, because in reality, we don't know. We have some false positives. So we have journals that were actually pretty old. I'm from Chile, and we discovered a journal from Chile that was from the 1800s. It's publishing poetry and things like that. But if you go to the website, it looks like someone set it up in 5 minutes. So it looks pretty interesting, but it's a legitimate journal. So we're trying to be careful with that. And we're trying to collaborate with these institutions. So not publishing openly and not blaming anybody, but we just want to show the scale of the problem. I hope that helps.
Great. Yeah. Go ahead, Lisa, and then we'll get Terry.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, I mean, do you think that good research can be published in these journals? Because I know some journals or systematic reviewers have a policy that they will exclude studies if they think they're problematic, but they don't exclude by journal. And so is the goal here to try to inform people about these journals so they don't publish in them?
Yeah, that's the goal. So we're also trying to be careful of that, because there is good research being published in these journals, and there are authors that actually leave or they're desperate to publish soon, so you could have good publications. So yes, the idea is to inform people, not to say, oh, everything that is published in this journal is wrong or bad.
Question over here, Terry.
Hi, everybody. Whoops, sorry. I'll stay way back here. Should we, because it's sort of the same experience with predatory conferences. Have you guys been getting those again? They're starting to come back around. So should we be reporting activity somewhere? Or I have a lot of junior faculty also that ask me about this, and I actually don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Unfortunately, I need data to run these kinds of models. So I don't think we have good data sets about predatory conferences. So, but if someone knows of an organization that is tracking them, I could use them to do something like this. And in general, data is really useful. So I think we need like a community effort to help the Directive of Open Access Journal. They're run completely voluntarily. So they don't have enough people help.
So you mentioned, you mentioned this Mills study that presumably tabulated all of these journals. Have you found using your approach that there's concordance between what was published from here and what you found in terms of the journals?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that study. We are just comparing against the Directive of Open Access journals. So when we validate it, we have a good agreement, but many times we have lots of false positives and false negatives. But we would like to try it against some of these other studies. There's a company that has a list, but it's proprietary, so it's a Cabal list. We have access to that, but I'm not sure we can say, hey, we scrape your website to validate our algorithm. I don't know how they will feel about that, but yeah.
Anything in the chat? Can we involve them?
Yeah, so we have a question. Anne in the chat asks that it looks like maybe the training data might be unbalanced. Do you think this was an issue? What kind of classifier did you use, and how many false positives or false negatives did you have? And what was the CAPA agreement for the reviewers?
In 30 seconds.
Okay, so yes, this is not perfect. We don't have a perfect agreement. We hope to submit this soon, so all of that information will be available. It's a random forest, and it's unbalanced because we have significantly more good journals than bad journals. So that's part of how the data is.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we're at time for this flash presentation. Dr. Acuña will be on the panel at the close of today's session.